Crome Yellow by Aldous Huxley, recorded for Librivox.org by Martin Clifton. Chapter 24. It was noon. Denis, descending from his chamber, where he had been making an unsuccessful effort to write something about nothing in particular, found the drawing-room deserted. He was about to go out into the garden when his eye fell on a familiar but mysterious object. The large red notebook in which he had so often seen Jenny quietly and busily scribbling. She had left it lying on the window-seat. The temptation was great. He picked up the book and slipped off the elastic band that kept it discreetly closed. "Private, not to be opened," was written in capital letters on the cover. He raised his eyebrows. It was the sort of thing one wrote in one's Latin grammar while one was still at one's preparatory school. "Black is the raven, black is the rook, but blacker the thief who steals this book." It was curiously childish, he thought, and he smiled to himself. He opened the book. What he saw made him wince as though he had been struck. Denis was his own severest critic, so at least he had always believed. He liked to think of himself as a merciless vivisector, probing into the palpitating entrails of his own soul. He was brown dog to himself. His weakness, his absurdities, no one knew them better than he did. Indeed, in a vague way, he imagined that nobody beside himself was aware of them at all. It seemed somehow inconceivable that he should appear to other people as they appeared to him. Inconceivable that they ever spoke of him among themselves in the same freely critical and, to be quite honest, mildly malicious tone in which he was accustomed to talk of them. In his own eyes he had defects, but to see them was a privilege reserved for him alone. For the rest of the world he was surely an image of flawless crystal. It was almost axiomatic. On opening the red notebook, that crystal image of himself crashed to the ground, and was irreparably shattered. He was not his own severest critic after all. The discovery was a painful one. The fruit of Jenny's unobtrusive scribbling lay before him, a caricature of himself reading. The book was upside down. In the background, a dancing couple recognisable as Gombold and Anne. Beneath, the legend, "Fable of the Wallflower and the Sour Grapes." Fascinated and horrified, Denis pored over the drawing. It was masterful. A mute, inglorious Rouvert appeared in every one of those cruelly clear lines. The expression of the face, an assumed aloofness and superiority tempered by a feeble envy. The attitude of body and limbs, an attitude of studious and scholarly dignity, given away by the fidgety pose of the turned-in feet. These things were terrible. And more terrible still was the likeness, was the magisterial certainty with which his physical peculiarities were all recorded and subtly exaggerated. Denis looked deeper into the book. There were caricatures of other people, of Priscilla and Mr. Barbecue Smith, of Henry Wimbush, of Anne and Gombold, of Mr. Scogan, whom Jenny had represented in a light that was more than slightly sinister, that was indeed diabolic, of Mary and Ivor. He scarcely glanced at them. A fearful desire to know the worst about himself possessed him. He turned over the leaves, lingering at nothing that was not his own image. 7 full pages were devoted to him. Private, not to be opened. He had disobeyed the injunction. He had only got what he deserved. Thoughtfully he closed the book and slid the rubber band once more into its place. Sadder and wiser, he went out onto the terrace. And so this, he reflected, this was how Jenny employed the leisure hours in her ivory tower apart. And he had thought her a simple-minded, uncritical creature. It was he, it seemed, who was the fool. He felt no resentment towards Jenny. No, the distressing thing wasn't Jenny herself. It was what she and the phenomenon of her red book represented, what they stood for and concretely symbolised. They represented all the vast conscious world of men outside himself. They symbolised something that, in his studious solitariness, he was apt not to believe in. He could stand at Piccadilly Circus, he could watch the crowds shuffle past, and still imagine himself the one fully conscious, intelligent individual being among all those thousands. It seemed somehow impossible that other people should be in their way as elaborate and complete as he in his. Impossible, and yet periodically he would make some painful discovery about the external world and the horrible reality of its consciousness and its intelligence. The red notebook was one of these discoveries, a footprint in the sand. It put beyond a doubt the fact that the outer world really existed. Sitting on the balustrade of the terrace, he ruminated this unpleasant truth for some time. Still chewing on it, he strolled pensively down towards the swimming pool. A peacock and his hen trailed their shabby finery across the turf of the lower lawn. Odious birds, their necks thick and greedily fleshy at the roots, tapered up to the cruel inanity of their brainless heads, their flat eyes and piercing beaks. The fabulists were right, he reflected, when they took beasts to illustrate their tractates of human morality. Animals resemble men with all the truthfulness of a caricature. Oh, the red notebook! He threw a piece of stick at the slowly pacing birds. They rushed towards it, thinking it was something to eat. He walked on. The profound shade of a giant ilex tree engulfed him. Like a great wooden octopus, it spread its long arms abroad. Under the spreading ilex tree, he tried to remember who the poem was by, but couldn't. The smith, a brawny man is he, with arms like rubber bands. Just like his, he would have to try and do his Muller exercises more regularly. He emerged once more into the sunshine. The pool lay before him, reflecting in its bronze mirror the blue and various greens of the summer day. Looking at it, he thought of Anne's bare arms and seal-sleek bathing dress, her moving knees and feet. A little loose with the white legs and bounding Barbary. Oh, these rags and tags of other people's making. Would he ever be able to call his brain his own? Was there indeed anything in it that was truly his own, or was it simply an education? He walked slowly round the water's edge. In an embayed recess among the surrounding yew trees, leaning her back against the pedestal of a pleasantly comic version of the Medici Venus, executed by some nameless mason of the Seicento, he saw Mary pensively sitting. "Hello," he said, for he was passing so close to her that he had to say something. Mary looked up. "Hello," she answered in a melancholy, uninterested tone. In this alcove, hewed out of the dark trees, the atmosphere seemed to Denis agreeably elegiac. He sat down beside her under the shadow of the pudic goddess. There was a prolonged silence. At breakfast that morning, Mary had found on her plate a picture postcard of Gobley Great Park, a stately Georgian pile with a façade 16 windows wide, parterres in the foreground, huge smooth lawns receding out of the picture to right and left. 10 years more of the hard times, and Gobley, with all its piers, will be deserted and decaying. 50 years, and the countryside will know the old landmarks no more. They will have vanished as the monasteries vanished before them. At the moment, however, Mary's mind was not moved by these considerations. On the back of the postcard, next to the address, was written in Ivor's bold, large hand a single quatrain. "Hail, maid of moonlight, bride of the sun, farewell, like plumes moulted in an angel's flight. There sleep within my heart's most mystic cell memories of morning, memories of the night." There followed a postscript of 3 lines. "Would you mind asking one of the housemaids to forward the packet of safety razor blades I left in the drawer of my washstand? Thanks, Ivor." Seated under the Venus' immemorial gesture, Mary considered life and love. The abolition of her repression, so far from bringing the expected peace of mind, had brought nothing but disquiet, a new and hitherto unexperienced misery. Ivor, she couldn't do without him now. It was evident, on the other hand, from the poem on the back of the picture postcard, that Ivor could very well do without her. He was at Gobley now, so was Zenobia. Mary knew Zenobia. She thought of the last verse of the song he had sung that night in the garden. Le lendemain, Félix Pessard aurait ton mouton et chien pour un baiser que le volage à Lisette donnait pour rien. Mary shed tears at the memory. She had never been so unhappy in all her life before. It was Denis who first broke the silence. "The individual," he began in a soft and sadly philosophical tone, "is not a self-supporting universe. There are times when he comes into contact with other individuals, when he is forced to take cognizance of the existence of other universes besides himself. He had contrived this highly abstract generalisation as a preliminary to a personal confidence. It was the first gambit in a conversation that was to lead up to Jenny's caricatures. "True," said Mary, and, generalising for herself, she added, "when one individual comes into intimate contact with another, she, or he, of course, as the case may be, must almost inevitably receive or inflict suffering." "One is apt," Denis went on, "to be so spellbound by the spectacle of one's own personality that one forgets that the spectacle presents itself to other people as well as to oneself." Mary was not listening. "The difficulty," she said, "makes itself acutely felt in matters of sex. If one individual seeks intimate contact with another individual in the natural way, she is certain to receive or inflict suffering. If, on the other hand, she avoids contacts, she risks the equally grave sufferings that follow on unnatural repressions. As you see, it's a dilemma." "When I think of my own case," said Denis, making a more decided move in the desired direction, "I am amazed how ignorant I am of other people's mentality in general, and above all, and in particular, of their opinions about myself. Our minds are sealed books only occasionally open to the outside world." He made a gesture that was faintly suggestive of the drawing off of a rubber band. "It's an awful problem," said Mary thoughtfully. "One has to have had personal experience to realise quite how awful it is." "Exactly," Denis nodded. "One has to have had first-hand experience." He leaned towards her and slightly lowered his voice. "This very morning, for example," he began. But his confidences were cut short. The deep voice of the gong, tempered by distance to a pleasant booming, floated down from the house. It was lunch-time. Mechanically, Mary rose to her feet, and Denis, a little hurt that she should exhibit such a desperate anxiety for her food and so slight an interest in his spiritual experiences, followed her. They made their way up to the house without speaking. End of chapter.